Welcome back to another episode of Pain Points with Darius Bell and Samson Jagoras, where this is the podcast for busy entrepreneurs out there building their businesses. And we're grateful that every week we come together to talk about marketing, entrepreneurship, economics, brand, so on and so forth. And we do it in a way that gets you in, gets you out back to building. Samson Jagoras, how you doing?
Good, man. I'm noticing now that I'm on this high definition that I got some fuzzies on my hat. So trying to take care of that.
The other portion of the podcast is style and fashion.
It's funny. Actually, on side note on that, I saw this this post that kind of went viral across Twitter and LinkedIn. And this guy was wearing a really nice suit, sitting on an airplane, and he was talking about when he travels, he always dresses really well. You just never know who you're gonna meet. And it was so divided between people that were like, real people with money don't dress like that, some people were like, dress to impress, and so I just thought it was funny because everybody tries to fit you into their box. But he runs a real estate firm, right? So he's in a service-based business, right, where his clients might dress more casual, but he ain't a billionaire, so
right.
So it's just so interesting.
That's a real discussion too, that I think there's no right way or wrong way. It's just personal preference. So people arguing and landing on it it's kind of futile.
I think the actual answer is authenticity, right? Like, how do you show up as your authentic self? Right. If dressing that way makes you feel good, you like to dress that way, great. I had this young guy that used to work for me, and he literally wears a suit every single day because he has this super baby face. And so he's dealing with money, real estate, business acquisition. And so he was finding people weren't taking him as serious. So he just started dressing sharp every single day, which helped level up his baby face.
It's interesting because, like, I'll share a little bit of insight about me personally. Whenever I travel on the plane, I do actually like to dress this in a certain manner that's professional.
Same.
And it doesn't have anything to do with like business or anything. It has everything to do with, candidly, what I want my perception to be based on my past experiences in airports and situations with people who look like me, actually. And so
no, you're not wrong. And people definitely treat you different as you're traveling, as you're moving through the lines, getting service, sitting in restaurants, like all of those things.
Yep. Yeah, it's the same reason why when I drive somewhere, typically, you know how you go on a road trip, people are like, oh, I'm putting my sweats on, I'm gonna be comfy. I'm generally like, I dress a certain way just in case I get pulled over and I got to get out the car, or in case something happens and I need to react to something. Like, I don't want to be trying to fight somebody in some flip-flops,
Yeah.
It's like you just got to think ahead,
That's really true. And if you're dressed in a way that is presentable, and you do run into that opportunity, right, because it just stumbles upon you, your mindset's just a little bit different, right?
Right. Versus
you're more attuned.
You're in a hoodie,
Correct.
Covered up, sitting next to Warren Buffett, didn't even know it. Then you wake up,
yeah, exactly right. So, anyways, it's just an interesting topic, and it's actually kind of a good segue into this first post that I saw that came up across LinkedIn.
Yeah, I got it pulled up here for you.
Yeah,
so read it from your desk if you want.
Yeah, so it comes from Anand Sanwal. I don't actually know who he is. Oh, look, founder of CB Insights. So pretty sharp dude.
Oh yeah.
I just saw the post and I thought it was interesting, mainly because if you're an entrepreneur or desire to be an entrepreneur and you're listening to this podcast, the statistics are that less than 9% of entrepreneurs have MBAs. Right? Most people who go get MBAs are looking to get jobs in the C-suite or go work for other actual successful entrepreneurs. They're not actually looking to go become entrepreneurs themselves. And so there's a big difference between how it plays out on paper and how it plays out in the real world, right? And the same could be said for, some people understand X's and O's in football really, really well. And then there's those that have actually played it and say, the way you just wrote that play, it's never going to work. And here's why it's not going to work, because that linebacker is an incredible athlete and he's going to shoot this gap and blow this play up in the backfield. And so the post says, don't hire MBAs. That, per this 1981 memo, hiring from Bear Stearns, right? They sought people with a degree of PSD, which they called poor, smart, and a deep desire to get rich, meaning hustlers, grinders, gritty people who don't come from money, who didn't have access to everything else, and don't have these preconceived notions about the way that they think it should work versus how it actually works. They're just ready to be a sponge and do whatever it takes in order to make it be successful. So the memo comes from Bear Stearns, and it says, there has been a lot of publicity lately about firms hiring students with MBA degrees. I think it's important that we continue a policy that has helped us prosper while growing from 700 people 8 years ago to over 2,600 today. Our first desire is to promote from within. If somebody with an MBA degree applies for a job, we will certainly not hold it against them, but we are really looking for people with PSD degrees, right? Poor, with a strong desire to get rich. They built this firm, and there are plenty around because our competition seems to be restricting themselves to MBAs. If we are smart, we will end up with the future C.Y. Lewis's, Gus Levy's, Cy Lewis's, Gus Levy's, and Bunny Lasker's. These men made their mark with a high school degree and a PSD. PSD stands for poor, smart, and deep desire to become rich, which is funny, though, because 37 years later, after that was posted circa 2008, the Bear Stearns collapse of 2008, which was along with the banking crisis, they were really wrapped up in the mortgages, and they got crushed and collapsed and had to be bailed out. And I believe they got bought by, I wrote this down, they got bought by JP Morgan Chase. They sold for $10 a share, well below its pre-crisis value. So it just goes to show you that sometimes people are too smart for their own good, right? And that's not ultimately what it takes in order to be successful in business, entrepreneurship, private equity, investment banking, etc.
Well, and it's something you've talked about a lot over the years of like what 9, 10, maybe 11% if you're generous of entrepreneurs have MBAs. Yep. So you're going to build a team in an organization that has pretty significant consequences on the very people who actually don't build business as a whole.
Yeah.
So their perspective is going to be different. The incentives are different. The molding and the experiences and their worldview in business is generally going to be different from that which has made business run historically over the last 6,000 years.
Yeah.
So very interesting. That's incredibly and it's an incredibly interesting memo to have, and even the notion of like we've grown to 2,600 people in 8 years on the back of simple folks.
Yep. Simple, hungry folks who grew up, were willing to put a shovel in the ground and do the work to climb the ranks, right? Those are the people that, it's the same model if you look at like Chick-fil-A, for example. Like Chick-fil-A very much has a model that they want the guy who's sweeping the floors to one day be able to own a franchise.
Yeah. It's funny you said different. This is a similar model because I was about to say it's a similar model to the church. I was literally about to say that. I was like Jesus, with the exception of Paul and Luke. You see the early church being built on the back of fishermen, simple people, entrepreneurs, like simple people. And
I've watched churches fail who try to bring in like an outside pastor to replace the founding pastor, and it never works, right? Versus somebody who grew people up within the church, and then the lead pastor steps out and the pastor from within grows up and takes over the church.
Yeah. Well, and that memo too points to what you just pointed out, which is actually, so you have the people in the seats, but the internal handling reflects the need to preserve culture.
Yes.
Culture.
Exactly right. Because there is something to be said about when somebody like circumvents the hierarchy and comes in of like, this guy hasn't done anything to build this business,
Right. Yeah. That's really good, man. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you bet. So segueing off of that, this is a video coming from Spotify founder that I thought we could watch. It's a little bit more related to startups, but I think, if you're an entrepreneur buying a business or you're an entrepreneur starting a company, we talk about it all the time. Grossly overestimate what we can get done in a year and undervalue 3 to 5 years of consistent hard work.
Yeah, Brian Armstrong. And just one clarification, I think he's Coinbase, actually.
Yeah, sorry, I said Spotify. Coinbase, yes.
He actually looks like the Spotify guy.
Yeah.
They have that same big old bald head. Like
People, they have an idea.
let's restart.
From one setback to the next with enthusiasm. If it's a complete shit show and it's chaos and nothing is working,
We
that's kind
started
of the
from the
default
beginning.
state. So you're doing it right.
I
If it
didn't quite catch the beginning, you might need to rewind it.
setback to the
Awesome.
next with enthusiasm.
See.
Are moving from one setback to the next with enthusiasm. If it's a complete shit show and it's chaos and nothing is working, that's kind of the default state. So you're doing it right. If it feels like that, just don't give up. Like, that's the main thing. A lot of times I've seen people, they have an idea, they have a team that comes together, they launch their first thing, it doesn't work. 4 months later, they have some big co-founder fight and they blow up and they all go home. And it's like, well, you didn't really try it, you know, because there's no idea that works on the first try. You have to put something out there and then grind it out like 2 or 3 years, usually, to sort of talk to your customers, improve the product, talk to your customers, improve the product. And sometimes it never works. And sometimes you break through after N number of years. If you look at almost every successful startup, it feels like it was an overnight success, but really that's just how history gets written in hindsight. If you talk to most of those founders in the early days, there was a period where any reasonable person would have quit. Nothing was working. They were in credit card debt. They were being sued. And all of them somehow persevered and pushed through and finally found something that started to get working. And then the next thing, and then the next thing. Startups are moving from.
Yeah, so it's just a good reminder. I think that we talk about it. Entrepreneurship gets glorified quite a bit. It's freaking hard. Doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're in a service-based business, I think it can tend to move a little bit faster, right? Because it's sales and marketing. Get out there, land your first client, you're on your way. If you're building something, building software, doing something like that, it can be harder, especially if you're kind of innovating or reimagining the way that it typically gets done. And that just requires persistence and consistency over everything else, which most people just don't have that staying power to go long enough or hard enough. And even if you do have early success, maybe in more of a service-based industry or business, the way you thought it was going to work or how you were going to get there or what it was going to become is just grossly different than the way that it actually plays out, because you just don't know enough when you first start out to, you know enough to be dangerous, but you haven't actually fully solved the problem yet.
Yeah.
Once you crack that code, then it gets a lot easier. And there's a whole graveyard of great ideas. We can pontificate about the next whatever. Execution is the only thing that's worship. But more importantly, better than execution is just staying power. Like, can you just stay in the game long enough to see the success?
Yeah. And, you know, he alludes to the 2 to 3 year period. You know, some of the people who, you know, I admire in business will talk about 5, 10, 15, 20 year periods. The notion of extending the period at which you see these things come into fruition. And I appreciate that. But I also, I've been thinking a lot about this recently of just how I think we've been conditioned to think on these like year at maximum time lengths. Right. Yeah. And I think it can be incredibly beneficial if it's paired with okay, I need to think about 5, 7, 9, 11, but I'm going to pair that with the next year of simple, dedicated, diligent action and pair that with the next year. So you leverage all of this experience of thinking in year terms, but you understand that the nature of the environment you're operating in demands more than that. And I think pairing those things together can help alleviate some of the anxiety and things and stuff that people deal with because it just takes longer. I mean,
it's definitely a marathon.
It takes 9 months to have a child.
Yeah.
Like, right. It's like, I don't know, man. I personally, I really appreciate you sharing that because it's something that I've been really coming to terms with over the last 4 months of this takes longer than you think. And it's just,
but because that's also encouraging though, because if it takes longer than you think and you can just stick with it, it means that every other person who's trying to compete in your space is having the same exact problem.
Right.
And so the people that can actually suffer through, you know, be unwavering in the vision and consistently just chipping away little by little, right? It's not a sprint. This is a 100-meter dash, right? We're talking about a 50K or a 100-miler or the Moab, whatever, 250 or whatever it is, right? Like that is just literally waking up, going to sleep, running, waking up, going to sleep, running. and you're just one foot in front of the other, knowing that, hey, there's a finish line in the future. I'm not quite sure when and how we're going to get there. It might take me a day. It might take me 5 days to finish this race, right? But I'm just going to keep going, be consistent at it. And if you can have that, it's like any investing. If you can have that perspective that this is a long game and you're planting a seed and you're going to water it, you'll be successful, right? Look at people who bought, stocks 20 years ago, right? People who bought Apple at 9 cents in 1981. It's like those people made a good choice, right?
Yeah, man. And the other where I was going to connect it to is like this piece of entrepreneurship. What a lot of people miss over the long term, over the years, is the character component. There's plenty of people that would talk about, actually Solomon said it right. In all work, in all labor, there is profit. And it's not necessarily monetary. There's something to be said about if you can, there's something to be said about your own character and behavior traits and skill development that at the end of 5-7 years, even if this thing doesn't work, you are significantly in a greater position to take advantage of the next opportunity that is bound to come after that, barring you sent off to war or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's really important that some people, we get focused on the results and the outcome of the building, but that word process that gets thrown around and has lost a lot of meaning really matters.
Yeah, and sometimes in startups too, especially like technology, the market is still shaping up, right? So Coinbase is an example of that. Spotify is an example of that. Airbnb is an example of that. Travelocity is an example of that, right? It's you're building something into the future that's there's two roads that are coming together and they haven't quite connected yet. And so you sometimes you just got to patiently keep pushing forward until those two roads connect, because you can see something that somebody else can't. And that's the superpower, man. So anyways, it just, I think, encouraging to that's just good. Like keep going.
That's great. I like it a lot.
And then this next one comes from Codie Sanchez, and it's kind of piggybacking off of that. As she's talking about Chamath from the Facebook and PayPal days, and this whole kind of the breakthrough that even Facebook had in order to really find their one key metric that moved their business forward.
From one idea. It's called 7 friends. Billionaire from one idea. It's called 7 friends in 10 days. So basically, Chamath was an employee at Facebook, and he found out that if a user got 7 friends in 10 days, they never left Facebook. It's what's called a 99% positive predictive indicator. What's fascinating about this is that means that if you get X, then you get money for life. The wild part is every business has one of these. People just don't spend time looking for it. Amazon, one-click checkout. Walmart, first-time low price. I could go on. But very few do the thing that finds the 7 friends. You're not going to be like that, though. So you become a Billy like Chamath. This guy became a Billy.
But the point being is it's not one thing. There's not like a magical thing. It's a culmination of things. And then all of a sudden you stumble on a metric or a sweet spot that says, hey, this is the thing that actually separates us from the rest of the market. And we're going to lean into that really heavily.
Yeah. And dude, I think the real nugget in there is what she's talking about is, so what is that Chamath was able, because he had eyes on it and it was in it, he was able to see the patterns and the sequence and see what would take place to ensure a favorable result that didn't end. And I think we as entrepreneurs, especially as newer entrepreneurs, speaking for myself, you start having to come to terms with that. A business is an apparatus, it's a mechanism that performs a certain way, has certain functions and design, regardless of what it is you're doing. And it's in that mechanism, that organism, for lack of a better word, or entity, there's these components and these things that work, that produce these outcomes. And you're doing all of this and you're having this action and these interactions, but can you see what's taking place that actually forms the thread, man? And to actually servicing a customer and then finding a solution, building a relationship, retaining them. And can you see those threads? And it's not easy to see those threads. Like, you have to
Well, at first it's just
train
chaos.
yourself. Yeah. And you have to develop the wherewithal internally before you do externally of like, okay, am I seeing what's happening in this business? What are the actions and the numbers and everything telling me? And I mean, I'm new. It's a new season for me, just even relating to it, of just like, okay, you got to see things differently. You got to see this mechanism, man. And he could see the mechanism. He could see, 7 moves, 7. Okay, to get 7 friends. This is okay. So that means he was watching. Oh, what happens when they get 3 friends? When they get 4 friends? Like, so yeah, really good.
Yeah, and that takes time, and it takes data, and it takes trial and error and experience, things that you just can't. There's no way around it but to go through it.
Yeah,
I think that
can't microwave
for
it.
anybody. Yeah, can't microwave. For anybody who's starting a business, for anybody who's early days in a business, or you're going to take over of a business, just keep going. Right? You don't know enough yet, but calculated moves, small baby steps forward. Progress is progress. It doesn't need to be fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amen. In all labor, there's profit, man.
Okay.
All right.
So the connection off of Chamath, segueing into this killer post that I didn't actually know about the Tesla versus BMW model, but it was a breakdown that Baptiste Vicini wrote about Tesla's strategy, and it was kind of eye-opening to me. We'll talk it from a business model standpoint, but the way that Elon's brain was working to expand the industry as a whole so that Tesla could continue to break out as the market leader. So I'll read it and you drive. Okay, yep. So it says in 2014, Elon gave away Tesla's secrets to BMW. Everyone thought he was crazy, but this act of charity, parentheses, was actually the most ruthless business move in corporate history. Here's why BMW never saw it coming, a thread. BMW was ready to dominate electrical vehicles in Europe. They had the brand, they had the engineering, they had the perfect strategy, but they made one fatal assumption about Elon's gift. It all started with a $5 billion bet. While BMW was signing battery contracts, Elon announced the Gigafactory, a facility designed to produce more batteries annually than the entire world did in 2013. But that wasn't even his boldest move. On June 12th, 2014, Elon published a blog post titled, "All Our Patents Belong to You." He announced Tesla would give away all their patents for free. The automotive world thought he'd lost his mind, but there was a genius behind the madness. See, Tesla had 2 problems. The EV market was too small, and no one was building charging stations. Elon realized Tesla couldn't win alone. They needed to grow the entire market. So he did something unprecedented. He weaponized generosity by giving away patents. Tesla encouraged others to build EVs, expanded charging infrastructure, made their technology the standard. While BMW focused on patenting IP, Elon was playing a bigger game. The Gigafactory wasn't just about batteries, it was about scale. While competitors used Tesla's patent to catch up, Elon was already building an empire that could produce batteries cheaper than anyone else. The gift was actually a trap. Tesla's patents got others to invest billions in EV tech, but without Tesla's scale, they couldn't compete on cost. BMW learned this the hard way. Tesla's batteries cost $187 per kilowatt hour. BMW's batteries cost $280 per kilowatt battery hour. The gap only grew wider. In 2016, Tesla was producing batteries 60% cheaper than the competitors. The patent giveaway had made Tesla's tech the standard, got others to validate the market, while Tesla built an insurmountable cost advantage. Pure strategic brilliance. But here's what everyone, hit that show more for me, everyone missed: how Tesla benefits from establishing the industry charging standards. This wasn't just about beating BMW. Elon proved something far more valuable. In the digital age, openness beats secrecy. Today's winners don't hoard technology. They share it strategically, build ecosystems, set standards, create network effects, while maintaining key competitive advantages in scale and execution. This is why understanding emerging tech isn't enough. True innovation comes from seeing the bigger picture, how technology can create value through collaboration, not just competition. We're entering a new era where success comes from strategic openness, technology serving human progress, not just driving efficiency. And that to me was pretty powerful. It's actually one of those things for me, like, building a marketplace. It's like sometimes you just got to give away the game for free just to get adoption. And once you get adoption, then you get the competitive edge, right?
Yeah, that's really good. I knew about him giving away the information. I didn't realize the outcome of him doing that. So that was really intriguing. And it makes me think about from a marketing perspective and content. There's a similar thread that blends with this, which is what he said at the end, is it's this openness that is actually spurring on the leaders and the movers and shakers of today and tomorrow. You look at a guy like a Hormozy, right? He's made not similar, but he's made similar moves in his lane of content and media. I'm going to give away the keys. And so now what happens? His offer formats have become the standard throughout advertising, right?
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate that. It's an intriguing thread.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting, man. Elon is dude. I don't know. I don't want to be rude and just give credit to Elon because he gets all the attention, but I'd be curious to know if he's got like just 2, 3, 4 people who with him lock and step, and they're just like, we're just making these decisions and we see things and we work well together. And yeah. Very impressive.
Yeah, he so kind of going all the way back to we're talking about 2 to 3 years is how long it takes. The moves that he makes are very strategic. He's thinking 2, 3, 4, 5 years in advance, right? Let's just look at like the Twitter acquisition, right? Like, that was a 2020 move, post 2020 move coming to 2024, and the impact that it had, I would say, on this election was insurmountable, right?
Oh, very much so.
Mainstream media couldn't overcome it. So, yeah. So, piggybacking off of that, more about consistency, but also just authenticity, a little bit around the power of content. This was a post that came from Alex Friedman. She's at Hey Alex Friedman on Twitter. And it says, the best marketing story I've heard lately. A big creator spent months making content telling everyone he's a private chef for a billionaire in the Hamptons, but he wasn't. He was renting out beautiful Airbnbs, cooking incredible looking food, and posting videos about it until wealthy folks saw it and actually wanted to hire him. Now he really is a private chef. Subcaption, create your own reality.
I dig it. Shout out to him. Fake it till you make it.
Fake it till you make it, but it just goes to show you the power of content, right? He had the skill, obviously, he had the talent.
Right.
Because as soon as he got that job, if he failed, right, his food was terrible, then he'd probably never get another job. But content, powerful.
I'm actually I want to go back to that real quick, and I want you guys to see this piece right here. It wasn't until wealthy folks saw it and wanted to hire him. What he understood, which many understand and many still are not acknowledging, is that these platforms are where attention resides. And even wealthy folks are not too busy to hop on their phone and see someone making some food that they want to eat.
Yep.
So,
or it gets shared, right? Of like, hey, we need to hire this guy for our next party or whatever. And then,
or their kid says, "Hey, mom, can you make that?" What do you mean? Yeah. Like, no, I can't make that. He can. Yeah.
Cool. So there wasn't as much economic news this week, but I did want to point something out that I think is relevant for us as entrepreneurs. And it's just in around this topic of inflation, more importantly, actually deflation, which I think is coming. I don't know how it's all going to play out, but there's some signs that it's here, and it probably has something to do with the new administration that's coming in. So the first post comes from Bravos Research, and it's actually a short little video that I'd like to watch. But the title of the post is, a lot of people are worried about a second wave of inflation. The commodities are actually trending lower. Here's what that trend should mean to us.
Let's watch it.
Over the past 2 years, we've seen a steady decline in the price of key raw materials, including following the Trump win. We so far haven't seen any kind of big jump in the price of commodities. Like, for example, we had in 2020 when trillions of dollars were injected into the economy as a result of the pandemic. And if we add the actual US inflation rate on top of this chart, we see how closely correlated these commodities are to the actual overall US inflation. Since mid-2022, we've seen inflation steadily decline, what is also called disinflation. This downtrend in inflation is the very thing that has helped the stock market rise over the last couple of years. You can see the peak in inflation in June was followed by a bottom in the stock market just a couple of months later. So a turnaround in inflation trend could very much lead to a turnaround in the stock market's trend. So that's something that we are watching very closely and with a very open mind. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a steady decline in the price of key raw materials, including following the Trump win.
It's repeating now. So, commodities are foods, materials, and they have been remaining, pretty consistently low. I would say oil is probably the largest leading indicator commodity that tells you a lot about where we are at in inflation, and then behind that would be just like building materials, and then precious metals and things like that go into all the technology that we use, like phones and computers, etc. So they've been low, and I would say that if you look at that chart, it's showing you a little bit, how it's showing you how hyperbolic it went, and they tend to get way outside the mean and then kind of return back to normal, which I would say that chart says it's probably returning back to something more appropriate or normal. And then obviously we've been, pumping interest rates back up over the past several years. And then we've been reducing them as of late. So it's like they're almost trying to like dial it in or calibrate it. But I would say that inflation has been driving the stock market, right? Like if you look back to 2023, you had the magnificent 7 stocks that were holding up the entire S&P 500. You pull those stocks out, and the other, 493 of those stocks would have been at a loss, right? So that's not sustainable either, right? And so I think that if you pull up the next post, it's kind of telling about where the smart money is at right now. So this is a post that came from Kevin Malone. He's at Malone_wealth. And it says all the richest billionaires are selling the market all-time highs, while all of the poorest are going all in right now. People will never learn. Follow the money for F's sake, is what he says. Be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. But he put this chart on X. You can't quite see. It's a little blurry. I don't know. Can you see that pretty good?
No, it's not great quality. It's a screenshot from him.
Yeah, it's a screenshot. But he's basically calling out all the major executives from, Amazon to you name it. Some of the major firms out there, major investors, all the C-level executives are unloading their stock. That's probably a pretty telltale sign, right? Like they're all looking at things internally that we are not necessarily privy to.
Yeah.
And I just can't see the market personally continuing at this rate the way that it has without some sort of snapback to the mean, right? Something more normal. We talked about a couple of weeks ago how the S&P 500 was, way, way overpriced on an inflationary relative value by about 5,000%. So that alone is pretty telling.
So he's saying, just in layman's terms, he's saying, follow them. They're getting out, so get out for a bit.
Correct. Exactly. And people who are late to the game are getting in, right? I always remind myself when I feel that urge, like, oh man, I feel like I'm going to miss this run, that it's like, don't do anything. Just stop, put the money aside, do nothing, because you're probably going to be coming into some sort of corrective period. And it might take a year for it to play out, but that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go in when you see big dips, 30% dips.
Dude, that's cool, man. I something that's been happening over the last couple of months as we've been doing this pod and we've changed our format is there are some really great people to follow online, in particular on X. that are really smart and sharp financially. And admittedly, I haven't spent enough time, but it's something I've been thinking about as you've been exposing me to more and more of these people. With like, there's some great people to follow online that can be really valuable to you in the handling of your resources.
Yeah, and I take everything with a grain of salt, right?
Right,
It's like,
of course, but
you
just
want
the
to be
thinking.
agnostic to anyone's opinions, but you're trying to constantly make sense of the world that's kind of happening around you. And as soon as you start to understand things like how the technical charts patterns parallel the fundamentals, all of a sudden you start to get a better kind of grasp on what's happening in the world around you. It becomes less scary. You become a lot more patient and strategic.
Yeah, and in particular, obviously, right, we got to put that disclaimer. This is not financial advice. Neither are they giving you financial advice. Maybe they are. But the notion of the things you need to be thinking about and considering, that's one of the most powerful things that it's one of the most underutilized aspects of the internet and of the social media age that we are in, is that, yes, you could use this for consumption, losing time, doom scrolling, being bored, or whatever it is, or you can actually go and find out the thoughts and things that are shaping the world you live in. So,
and that's my favorite part about the pod that we do is I'm looking at it saying, hey, this would be great for our audience, right? So it causes me to stop and digest what I'm consuming. That doesn't mean I don't get caught up just consuming at times, but I find it's a lot more fun leveraging bookmarks and strategically, building these stories that I want to shape up for the pod than just sitting there and just mindlessly scrolling,
Yes. Well, speaking of that, we're going to transition over to this next one. Are you familiar with Steve Blank?
Give me more context.
I only know him just from consuming SaaS content. I don't know any of his professional journey, but he's one of the OGs of the startup movement, and in particular, SaaS startups. And he's a multi-billionaire investor at this point, a professor, author, but he has a website where he's just been collecting his thoughts over the years, various different materials, shouting out other people, and it's just a great website. And in fact, it's actually, if you look at his website, Steve Blank, it's old. It looks like a 1994 website, but it has a lot of great information on it, which is actually a common thing from some of these older billionaire people. They don't care about a fancy website. They just care, does it contain the information I want to house and be able to share? And
there's a certain point where you got enough, what do they call it, FU money, that you just don't need to impress anybody.
Yeah, but I was just browsing through some of his 2-minute section. He's got this section of 2 minutes and 2-minute lessons. And I want to share this art of the MVP. This is someone who was on the front lines and still is actively involved in the world of startups. And I really appreciate his take on the art of the MVP. So I'll share it with you.
Now, for both physical and mobile channels, there's an art to building a minimum viable product. Just think about this. An MVP is not a minimal product. An MVP is not like, well, we only have 3 weeks, so we cut off the feature list here. That's not what an MVP is. An MVP is based on interaction and iteration in understanding customers' needs and pains and gains. And if all you're doing is cutting off the feature list, then you clearly haven't run the process. Sometimes we get, but my customers really don't know what they want. I'm creating something so new. Getting out of the building is just a waste of time because if I show them my solution, they're not even going to know what planet I'm talking about. We're going to be talking about the problem of market type. But there's a case called the new market where you're right. Customers have never seen an iPhone before or never seen a new product before. In that case, you still want to get out of the building. Now, and what solutions are they using to solve their pains and gains? And so we'll talk about market type later, but when you hear people say, but my customers don't know what they want, just park that for a while because that's not an excuse to stay in the building and keep adding features.
Roger that. So he has this expression, get out of the building. And it's at the heart of what he calls the art of the MVP, which is you're not physically getting out of the building and going outside. You're going, his whole point is like the X factor in the MVP is your relationship with this customer. And it's tried and true. It's not a novel thought by any means. We've seen it expressed, but he really stands on it. And he continues to point his students and people back to it of like, get out of the building. Don't, he, if you watch read any of his other materials, he pulls these sayings that you can hear from people just saying over and over, like, my customers don't know what they want. It's like, okay, that statement is far less true than you think it is. But you got to get out of the building to know. And that's what's at the heart of his art of the MVP. And I just thought that was refreshing for people in startups, refreshing and encouraging for us as we're continuing to build clearly is continue to get out of the building. Don't get stuck in the building and get out there and keep talking to people, because you'll see, like he said, let's just say it is super novel. He then said, well, how do you know how they're spending their time? Like, that is so important. If you know how your people are spending their time, that's not an easy thing to find out. It's an easy thing to chase, but if you can get a real clear vision of how people are spending their time, you building solutions for problems, whether perceived or not unperceived yet, it's there.
I think the bigger thing I took away from that was people think an MVP is cutting the features list.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And it's like, it's not, right? And so this is what makes it unique when you're building a product to solve your own problem, right? When you're solving your own problem, it's like, what the features are. So you got to keep stacking features and keep building, even though it's not quote unquote complete or perfect, because that's the system that needs to be out there to solve your own problem. And if you solve your own problem, then you're solving everybody else's problem, because those people that you're asking, they don't know what their problem is. It's not that they don't know what their problem is. They're not sure how to actually communicate the problem in a way or understand the ways that you can fix it, right? So they're just saying, oh, it's just broken. Like, well, yeah, it is just broken, because you continually do the same thing and expect a different result because you're not even sure how to fix the problem, right? It's like having an earache and going to the eye doctor and being like, hey, can you fix my ear problem? It's like, we don't speak the same language, right? The only tool you have is a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. So an MVP isn't just like build it, get it out there and sell it. It's continually keep building minimum features and working on getting adoption as you can keep building more and more and more, right? And that allows you to have those conversations and keep going forward, moving forward and making the product better,
Mm-hmm. Yep. So going off of startups, so you have Steve Blank, who's OG in the space, and you have someone, we mentioned him last week, Greg Isenberg, but he had another post that I think is a good read. So I'm going to read it real quick before we jump into the marketing brand portion of the pod here. But I think this is a good read that is going to be encouraging to founders, new entrepreneurs, people buying, young, old. So Greg says, I'm calling him Greg like I know him. Greg says, all right, here we go. So Greg Isenberg on X says, at 20, you're dangerous because you don't know what's impossible. Every founder is building AI for X, and you're asking, why does Visa still hold your money for 3 days? Why doesn't IG feel like a social app for friends anymore? Your naivete is your secret weapon. Plus, you're probably pretty broke, so you have tons of ambition to make it. Then reality teaches you expensive lessons. You launch your worst product, but get distribution right. Your MVP gets traction, but can't get scale. Users love your product, but won't pay. The feature everyone said they needed, no one uses it. Your dumb buddy from high school sold his company for $15 million because he knew the director of product of Google. Your biggest competitor isn't other startups, it's inertia. Users hate their current solution, but hate changing more. Very important point. Customers enthusiastically saying yes in meetings never writes checks. Your perfectly scalable tech stack doesn't matter when you can't find users. Your product never really answered the why now question. By age 30, the game reveals itself. You see patterns others miss. Like paper valuation of your startup is kind of BS. The best companies start by solving a small, boring problem perfectly. Consumer social is the hardest game in town right now, but fun. X is a bubble. Failing marketplaces become SaaS companies. Growing SaaS companies build marketplaces. Every big company is a distribution company wearing product company clothes. Your clean architecture matters less than your first 100 customers. Very important. Most startup ideas are timing mistakes, not product mistakes. But you do start getting more jaded. At 35, you can't unsee these lessons. Profitability gives you ultimate leverage to do what you want in life. Bad UI with distribution beats great UI without it. Consumer indifference kills more startups than competition. The best products look like toys to incumbents. That's very important also. If you plan on selling your company one day, probably good to know the people in charge of making those decisions. What you can't measure is usually what matters. Market timing beats execution every time. Edge cases reveal your true moat. The best products solve problems so fundamental they look obvious in retrospect. The words cash flow sounds better and better to you. If you're lucky, you learn the 35-year-old lessons at 21. Thought that was very good, man.
True. Yeah, the last one is very important to you, right? Of like, well, here's what we raised this much money on this valuation. It's like, cool. Nobody can retire off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Cash flow is king. Revenue is king. But a couple things he said in there is like SaaS marketplace companies become SaaS companies. SaaS companies become marketplace companies. Meaning, like, you have to be building tooling if you're a marketplace, right? At the same time that you're building the marketplace. It's not just the marketplace. And vice versa. If you have great SaaS tooling, you're going to build a marketplace. Look at Salesforce, for example, right? Look at Go High Level, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've, in a way, built a marketplace of tools that people can integrate into their system, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so the answer is you can't just be one dimensional, right? It's like, it's all of these things, even though we want it to be like, oh, I did the one thing, or, oh, I got it out there. Why aren't people buying it? That's just not reality. It's all of the things. You continually build, you're continually building, you're continually selling, you're continually pushing adoption. And then eventually you hit this inertia, this critical mass that unlocks the whole playbook, right?
Yeah. And
it was years of work.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, even in the illustration, it's a 15-year difference between the first position and the third. And I think that the big takeaway that I saw is going back to what we were talking about earlier, is in a business having these tried and true things that work. That's why he can finish with saying something like cash flow is going to sound better and better to you at 35. You should learn that 21, because don't get caught up in the like that 30 after the 20-year-old, you kind of get caught up in the like, oh, I want to solve the tech and I want to do this. And it's like, no. All of those, a lot of the companies have bells and whistles and fancy this, and founders and valuations have disappeared. But there's some tried and trues that have built problems that actually built products that solve problems, that have distribution that people want, that look like toys to their incumbents because they lost sight of the problem themselves, and cash flow. But cash flow, not for cash flow, but because cash flow means people want what you're making.
Yeah, and you just have a profitable business, right? Like pre 2020, everybody was valuing things on growth if you were in tech, right? Growth, and then 2020 happened, and it's like, what's your EBITDA? Oh, you have a negative EBITDA? Not interested. Next.
What's EBITDA? No one told me what EBITDA was.
So I think if you're just always focused on trying to get to profitability, it's a fine balance, right? Of like building, because you got to spend some money and drive marketing, and working towards profitability, at least most definitely in the software space for certain. It's a little bit easier in my opinion than just like the pure services world.
Yeah.
Where you don't have your own proprietary tech or anything like that. But yeah, that was a great read. Greg's also a good follow-up. He puts out a lot of good, super long threads like that. Yeah,
dude. And he communicates very clearly. All right. So we're going to wind down here in these closing minutes. I don't know if you noticed this, but actually, let me back up and I won't ruin it. But I wrote in our caption on the show notes of inspiration in leadership and in marketing. It goes a long way. And what we see in a figure like Donald Trump is an inspirational figure. Even though people on the left don't want this is something I've been saying for months, actually, before I jump into this, is people say like, why are they trying to take him out? Why would he being assassinated attempts twice? It's because of what he will bring to people by way of being himself. And if you can't control him, what do you think is going to happen to his supporters? You won't be able to control them. You know, if you just won't happen. And so what we're seeing now, if you look at the NFL this past weekend, I don't know if you saw this, but we had tons of people busting out the old Trump shuffle, and they're not doing it for political reasons. It's just something that's it's just trending right now. And so we're going to play this clip here where people.
Well, check the flag here. Was thrown right around. Smith! Darius Smith with a sack.
Sorry, that's extremely loud. I didn't know it was going to be that loud on your ears. My bad, guys. Let me turn that down.
In his Lion.
So this wasn't just the only one. There were more. There was one that they're already having talks about potentially having talks about banning this dance move. You saw it, John Jones after he won his fight on the weekend, bust out the Trump dance. A bunch of other people in soccer, and what it got me thinking was just how a lot of people on the left are going to be extremely upset that this is happening. Everything's going to they're going to be complaining like you're bringing politics into sports after you said keep it out. But what they don't realize is that one, this is a trend. Trends catch on. But two, why is it catching on? Is because this man represents that, like, I got confidence, man. I'm gonna have some fun again. You know, everything has been so like, don't offend anyone, don't do anything, don't do this. And what Trump really represents, man, obviously he has a lot of self-confidence. He exudes that. That's why people have been attracted to him for 4 decades now. Because he's someone who does things the way he believes that they should be done. And this dance catching on is just a modicum of that. And people they're just having fun again. And they know people don't like it. They know that it's controversial, but they're attaching themselves to the trend, but also to the man who's just like, he does his thing and he's Trump and he doesn't stop and he's going out and he's going to just go get it done, go get the job done. And so I just really appreciate that this is happening. And it just goes to show you little ways that an inspirational figure could bring something forth that actually becomes a trend in its own right, like this dance.
I was going to say, I think it's also a bit of a release, right? Like people feel
exactly
like
right.
They can do that again. Like, yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's catchy, and people are losing their minds over it. But I love it because it's exactly that, man. It's a release, and there's been this breath of fresh air in the last couple of weeks. And I think what happened, it's actually what happens in a family. So what happens in a family, for those of you who don't have children, is when there's a strong man in the house, not a tough love kind of dad that squashes everything, but when there is a strong presence of a man in a family where the women and children feel secure, there's more play. There's more laughter. And it's not even that this is no daddy Trump stuff, but I think this is just the like you said, the relief and the like, oh man, like the U.S. has someone who's confident again, and people don't even really know that they're doing it for that reason. Right. And I think you just pointed that out of like, we have someone we can be confident. He has some flair. He has some fire, you know, like things are going to be all right. So.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
Yeah. There were a couple other marketing things to get into in terms of the timing of the pod. I want to honor the time for our listeners. We can always dig into those later. They're not time bound.
Well, let's end with one more because there's a couple good ones on that list.
Okay. Well, let's end with this last one. It's going to be from Al Reese. Everyone knows who Al Reese is, or if you're in business, you probably no, we're going to go Jean-Claude Van Damme. We're going to go Jean-Claude Van Damme. And so
one of the greatest warrior characters in television history, movie history.
Yeah. And an actual martial artist too.
Bloodsport changed my life as a kid.
Yeah, people don't know what Bloodsport is today. They're like, "What's that?" Like, you gotta sit down, man. You gotta watch Bloodsport. But it's speaking of Bloodsport. this fits with that, right? What we're going to look at. So this comes by way of Dickie Bush, who's a wonderful follow. Dickie Bush, a great writer, has a great company. Him and Nick Cole, they have a fantastic what they do. So Dickie Bush says this is Jean-Claude Van Damme. In 2013, he drove the world crazy, but not because of his movies. His genius viral marketing stunt put Volvo on the map and is arguably the greatest ad of all time. In 2012, Volvo trucks were facing a massive challenge. They had no marketing budget. They were stuck in a boring B2B industry. They needed to launch 5 new trucks globally, but they had this one insight. Quote from the company: "We quickly understood that there are more people interested in trucks than just men in gray business suits. Instead of traditional ads, they chose a viral marketing campaign. Volvo Trucks released the epic split featuring action star Van Damme, but this wasn't just an ad with a crystal clear message about Volvo's dynamic steering. Something in between the two trucks. Choosing Jean-Claude Van Damme was a stroke of genius. It reflected precision, strength, and resilience. A relatable action hero who is emotionally appealing to Volvo's target market, truck drivers, i.e. Bloodsport. The ad's narrative arc was a masterclass. It opens with Jean-Claude Van Damme waxing lyrical. I've had my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. As the camera pans out, we see Jean-Claude Van Damme doing a split between 2 Volvo FM trucks, backed by India's Dreamly only time. The tension builds as the trucks slowly reverse, forcing Jean-Claude Van Damme into a full split. One false move or one teetering from these trucks, and it is over, not just falling, but crushing him. The whole ad was captured in one take, no cuts, no CGI, shot at dawn at an abandoned airport in Spain, golden light, artful angles, super slow-mo. But here's the results of it. He points it down. I'm going to skip some of this just because we don't. Here's the ad results. They were unreal. In 4 weeks, it racked up 75 million YouTube views, most for an auto ad ever, 6 million social shares, 10 million Google impressions, and 10,000 plus editorial pieces, earning an estimated 70 billion in media value on a 100K media spend.
Wow.
Yeah. So he ends here. What can entrepreneurs, creators, and marketers learn from the epic split? Get creative within limits. This is for you, entrepreneurs. Get creative within limits. Use emotion. Features tell. Stories sell. Tap into your audience's dreams and identities. And his final takeaway is virality is the ultimate leverage in the 21st century. Master, or in this case, get familiar with the art of psychology and persuasion, and the world is yours.
I remember that commercial. I forgot about that commercial. It was hilarious because it's also there's also that generational connection, right? Of like we all grew up with watching Van Damme do his thing.
Yeah.
And that scene of him in Bloodsport doing the splits on the chairs to get ready, right, was pretty epic. And then he became known for that.
Yeah. I did pull it up for us if we wanted to watch it, but hey, who knows?
Let's watch it. Let's watch it. We'll end on that.
All right, roger that. Presenting the epic split. No. All right.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection, a pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics, and a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
And who can say if you love as your heart shows only time?
Dang, that was good.
The music sells it.
It really does. It matches the golden light. Well,
yeah, beautiful. Great ending, man. Thanks for bringing that to the show.
Of course, man. Great pod today. And that's a wrap.
Awesome, man. Until next week.
Until next week. Take care.
Peace.